Managing relationships. This is what they gave to me. Below the surface, trust that transforms partnerships. And so I was walking around earlier today, and I was asking some of y'all, if you had to summarize managing relationships into a single phrase or a single sentence, what would it be? And I got all the usual, integrity, honesty, treat people the way you want to be treated, the golden rule. But then I got some real zingers that jumped out at me. You guys are brutal. One I got was just use AI to manage it all. Some real lasting relationships. Or here's one, have fewer of them. They're easier to manage that way. Or probably one of my favorites, relationships are like when you pee your pants. Everyone can see it, but only you can feel the warmth. Kindness changes everything. So anyways, it was I got some really interesting feedback. And so I'm going to be repeating some of what you guys already heard today, but I got to prepare my presentation before I heard theirs, so I won't apologize for repeating some of what you already heard. So let's set the standard. So what is the goal? I got two comparison pictures up here. In both of these pictures, there's both working relationship. Both people are signing the contract. But what's the end goal? Can you guys spot a couple of key differences in the picture? It looks like one is probably a little bit more pleasant, a little bit more on the same team than the other one. And so my whole speech is going to be from the premise that we want to work together from a place of mutual trust, mutual respect, where we're on the same team working together. That's a lot more fun than when we're working from a place of everything is bound by contracts and very little bound by actual trust. And so if you prefer to be the folks on the left, then this probably is not the presentation that you are going to be interested in, because we're going to be operating from the premise today that the goal is to be working from a place of high trust. We use the phrase a lot in our office that we all go to work to make money, we all have relationships. But when you're fighting about giving more to the other party, it's just a whole lot more fun than when you're fighting to take more from the other party. And so when you have a place of extreme trust, a good partnership, work just all of a sudden becomes a lot more fun than what it is otherwise. So going into that is what causes relationship stress. We've all had those relationships that just went very well. We've had those relationships that didn't go well. So what are some of the key reasons when relationships don't work out or when it causes stressors? And so I've put a lot of thought into this over time, and I pretty much can think that all this business relationship stress we've had, I can put it into one of these two boxes. So the box on the left is where there's just simply a misalignment of our core values, our goals. The box on the right is broken trust. And so there's a lot of reasons why values can be misaligned. There's a lot of reasons of why trust can be broken. But most of the relationship stress that I've ever run into I've been able to boil it down and say, well, that fit into one of these two categories. So starting with the company values, I think it's important to know your why. It's important to know why you do what you do. It's important that your company is based on values instead of just what mood you're in that day. And then work with people that align with those values. And so most of this is from the premise of managing relationships with dealers. So I'm assuming most of you are either service providers, you're rent-own companies, manufacturers, and so the bullet points I was given for this presentation was managing dealer relationships specifically. So that's the premise that I'll be talking about. And so your company values, when you have those established, when there's a misalignment, it tends to create stress. And we've got a couple of different ways we can approach that. Amos 3:3 says, can two people walk together without agreeing on the direction? Now, I don't feel like you have to agree on every little bit, every little I that's dotted, every little T that's crossed. But when you're wanting to go opposite directions, it will cause a tremendous amount of stress in your business relationship that can easily be avoided. For example, in our company, we're all about service. We want to be known as one of the best service providers, one of the best qualities. Well, with providing a premium product with a premium service, we're not always the cheapest. You don't go buy a high-end sports car and expect to pay cheap car prices. And so it has caused stress in the past where we have a shopper that's looking for the cheapest price possible, and they don't care about the extra bells and whistles, they don't care about quality, they don't care about service, they don't care about repeat customers, they're just looking for the best price. What happens when you use that premise and you don't see if there's alignment, you begin doing business together, and it's just these constant underlying stressors that maybe it's not readily apparent what those stressors are. And so like for manufacture, for example, if you're building sheds and you're all about building the best quality shed you can build, and then you have a lot of dealers that want to sell the cheapest shed in the market, you see where there's room for all of a sudden stress. So it's important to pick something that you want to be known for. I'm just picking quality versus price, but this can go a lot of different directions. And so we've done business with people in the past that wasn't aligned to begin with the best, but through conversations, through influence, we were able to find a common path and set a common vision, a common goal, and it worked out well. But we've been doing this long enough that we've taken the approach that if we determine that we do not have common vision, common goals, and there's not a path forward, then we simply recommend that they find a company where that does align. Business is so much more fun when you can help your people win by saying, we're not a fit for you. You'll be much happier working with our friends over here. They provide the service you're looking for versus trying to stay in the relationship and it's constant friction, constant stress. So that's our solution to the first problem of alignment. And sometimes when you find misalignment, you can dig a little deeper and you can find another thing that you're aligned in and focus on that. So it's not, I wouldn't encourage you to just as soon as you run into a bump in the road that you give up on the relationship. But it is important to dig down and say, why was there a bump in the road? Why was there that friction? And if it truly is a misalignment in values, then you're probably doing that person a service by letting them go somewhere where they do align. And also, we ask the question, what is this relationship costing us? Sometimes we are keeping really good aligned dealers away by working with dealers that are not aligned. Because you build a reputation. You build, if you're looking for salespeople that are selling sheds, if you just work with anybody and everybody, other people take notice of that. And so sometimes you're losing really good potential people by working with people that you're not aligned with. And this is not a good versus bad. This is simply what's the course of your company and what's the course of their company, and is it compatible? So moving on beyond that, moving over to the trust side. So if we get the alignment side out of the way and we're like, hey, at the core, there is alignment, we're doing well. Moving on to the trust, what are some common reasons trust get broken? I'm going to have you guys throw in here. What do you guys think? What are some common reasons y'all think that trust gets broken in a relationship? When you're not transparent? Evasive. Awesome. Anybody else? Communication. Bad communication, unclear communication. Anything else? Not keeping your commitments, promising on commitments you can't keep. I should have you up here, Slim, with me. We've got a lot of history together. I made a list of some of the reasons that I thought. So the common reasons trust is broken: commitments not kept, someone mentioned that one, inconsistency, incompetency, lack of empathy or respect, and misunderstandings. I'm sure there's more reasons than this, but these are the common ones that we've seen in our company, that when there has been broken trust and we dig down deeper, it's almost always been rooted in one of these 5 things. So we're going to go down through each of these 5, just talk through them a little bit. So how do you reverse that when we're going from broken trust to try to build trust? And it's a lot easier to build trust from ground zero than it is to rebuild trust once it's been broken. It's not impossible, and if you can rebuild trust once it's been broken, it's actually stronger. That trust heals back stronger, but it's a lot less work to just build trust from the get-go. So commitments not kept. How about we replace that one with under-promise and over-deliver? Don't promise things that you can't deliver on. What if we would, instead of inconsistency, we would replace that with being so consistent that you become predictable? And I know that's not a buzzword. Being predictable is not something that we generally want to be known for, but it does build trust. What if we would replace incompetency with keep learning? You are the professional in rent to own. What if we replace lack of empathy and respect with getting to know the person beyond just the work environment? Really getting to know the people for who they are. And what if we replace misunderstandings with avoiding topical only disagreements? I'm going to get into that quite a bit at the end of my talk if I have time and really explain that in depth, what I mean by that tagline. So let's start with the number one, commitments not kept. This is essential in building a relationship with trust, is making sure that you can keep your commitments. So what are some very practical ways you can do this? And I'm going to get pretty practical on a few of these points. And a few of these points I have some backstories I can throw in there as well. Somebody mentioned transparency earlier. So how do you keep commitments? Being completely transparent. If you've promised to do something and you're running late on it, rather than making excuses, rather than lying and saying, well, something came up, just be completely transparent. Hey, I made a promise that I shouldn't have made in the moment, and it's taking longer. Whatever it is, just be completely transparent about where you're at, where the process is at, what you're doing. Only make promises you are sure you can keep. This one, so in the under-promise, over-deliver, it's not just in delivering, but it's also in your commitment. Setting realistic expectations, making sure that you allow room to be able to completely deliver on what you commit to. When you do that, you allow space to pleasantly surprise by over-delivering. In our company, we intentionally do this by, when we're negotiating with someone, we intentionally negotiate at a level that's lower than what we're actually intending to do business. And what I mean by that is if Slim comes to me and he's wanting me to do a favor, I will intentionally promise to do a little bit less than what I'm intending to do so that I'm allowing space to pleasantly surprise him. I don't know how we've done it that Slim, but that's a real intention of ours, and we're very deliberate about it. It's not just a cliche saying in our office, but we really go out of our way going, hey, we've committed to doing this for 2 months for this person, but when we write up the SOPs in our back office, we'll say we're going to do it for 4 months. So the letter we're giving to Slim will say 2 months. The letter we're giving to our employees will say 4 months if it's something that we're committed. That's just an example. You can get that practical, that specific with it, and it will build trust when you do that. It will also set expectations, though, that sometimes you have a hard time keeping up with the expectations you set for yourself if you're not careful. Going to the next one. So what are trust breakers? One of them was inconsistency. So how can we be consistent? Well, just be dependable. That's actually something that's not as common in this industry as it should be, but your word should be your word. Your word should mean a lot more and carry a lot more weight than your signature on a piece of paper does. It's largely believed to be old-fashioned and out of date that a man's as good as his word, but we still buy that and say, no, a man is as good as his word. We want to be that dependable. And I'm going to go pretty fast over some of these points, so I have a little bit more time to go into some of the other ones. Another one is know why you do what you do. Earlier I mentioned that sheds is what I do, but it's not my why. That's a pretty big deal to me. When I started doing rent-own on sheds, It was because I had manufacturers coming to me asking me, hey, would you consider doing rent-to-own? I was looking for a different job than what I had. It sounded like a good fit, and I started doing rent-to-own with very little thought. Well, fast forward 4 or 5 years, and the fun had kind of started wearing off. And when I was getting those calls and texts evenings and weekends and early mornings, and it just wasn't much fun anymore. So I started going, why am I doing what I'm doing? And have you guys ever asked you those questions? Well, I sure did. And I started discovering that it was a whole lot deeper than sheds. It was about the relationships I had built. It was about the people I'd impacted or had the ability to impact. It was about people that I had on my team that were smarter than I was, better than I was at a lot of things, me getting to go to work with them. And we have some incredible customer success stories. We have led customers to Christ. I'm a believer. I don't make much apologies for that. I'm very outspoken about that. It affects as many of my decisions as I can remember to have it affect. And when you have a salesperson that's working for you, and when they come, they are separated from their kids, their spouse is in prison, they're fresh out of prison, they are coming off of a 7-year-long addiction to all kinds of drugs and all kinds of messed up. And 2 years later, you look back and they've been sober for 2 years. The state gave her kids back. She's back with her husband. She has a good paying income. She is making steps to repairing her teeth, things that she did to try to set a new identity for who she is. It gives you a lot of why I go to work. And so I'm not saying this story to try to pat my coworkers on the back for what they've done. I'm just simply saying that's our why, a whole lot more than just sheds. Sheds is what we do, it's not our why. And when you know your why and you keep reminding yourself of why, the consistency comes a whole lot easier. Are you guys following that? It's not just... If the sheds is just, if that's your why, well then your consistency is going to change as the market changes. Your consistency is going to change on the demands and the moods of the people you're working with. But when you have a much deeper, stronger why, all of a sudden the market can change. The people you're working with, what they want can change, but you're still very consistent. You're very grounded. Consistency comes natural when you do that. Set clear expectations. This is very important. The more vague you are, the more opportunity it is for trust to be broken. And then be quick to take responsibility for your mistakes. We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. If you haven't, you will. But just take responsibility for your mistakes. I have a lot more trust for people when they make mistakes and take responsibility for their mistakes than I do when they don't make mistakes to begin with. Going to the next one. And my slideshow froze up. Try this. There we go. Incompetency. So how do you overcome incompetency? So what I mean by this is when someone pretends to be a professional in a field, but yet they can never help, they can never have any answers, that can soon erode a lot of trust very quickly. We're not all competent on day one. How do you become more competent? Somebody want to throw out an idea? How do you become more competent? Be more involved. We learn by doing, right? It takes an average of 10,000 hours doing something to become a professional at that thing we're doing. So none of us start as a professional on day one, but taking the time to educate ourselves and our team is huge. In this industry especially, there's a lot of tax implications, a lot of legal implications, what we're doing. There's been several class action lawsuits in our industry just from people not doing this. Things that could have been very easily avoided just by taking a little bit of time to educating ourselves. And so making sure that whoever's responsible for your dealers, whoever's responsible for this relationship, making sure they know what they're talking about and they're not just repeating something they heard on Facebook or TikTok or something like that. But make sure they actually know what they're talking about. Know state laws and how they apply. This is a big one in this industry specifically. States have very different laws, and what's mandatory in some laws is actually forbidden in others. What's mandatory in some states is actually forbidden in other states. So I hear a lot of chatter out there about, well, the law says this. Well, depends which state you're in. So it's important that your team that's interacting with your salespeople know those laws and how they apply. And that's the NSRA is a tremendous resource to learn some of that. Know your business protocols and the whys. We, in our office, sometimes we say, try to be less stupid. Try to have the protocols less stupid. So when we have a protocol, know why we have it, because it might be a protocol that was necessary 8 years ago that's no longer necessary. So know why you have the protocols you do. Be able to explain them from a premise of why instead of just, well, that's the way we've always done it. And for sure, don't throw your team members under the bus. If you throw, well, that's how somebody in the office makes me do it, or that's the way my boss makes it do it, you're not building trust with your salespeople because they're realizing that you're not a united team. So be united, know your protocols, know why you have the protocols you do. And it's okay to say, I don't know. You build a lot more trust with a salesperson when they ask a question, when you simply tell them, I don't know, versus fabricating an answer they later find out wasn't found in reality. And that leads us into my final point, stay humble. I was just talking to my friend Joe earlier today, and I said there's no person so smart that they can't learn something from the dumbest person. And I truly believe that. And I think if we embody that, that will help. I'll put it this way, humility can cover for an awful lot of incompetency. Going on to number 4, what erodes trust? The lack of empathy or respect. Greg Rochelle has a saying that says that consistency, let me see if I can remember it, consistency plus empathy plus transparency equals trust. There we go. Consistency plus empathy plus transparency equals trust. And I think that's a very true saying. Chris Voss, an FBI hostage negotiator, said that in all his hundreds of cases where he was negotiating hostages, he never found a single isolated case that empathy did not work on the bad guys. He said there is not a person on earth that he has ever encountered at his tent at the FBI that empathy did not work at helping build trust. And so he's trying to build trust with guys that don't know what trust is. So it's a big one that gets overlooked a lot, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time. Just what is empathy? What is respect? I mentioned get to know the person beyond work. Getting really practical, I would say make deliberate time for this. If you call the salespeople up just when there's an issue, just when there's a problem, after a while, whenever that salesperson's phone rings, they're going to expect, oh, there's an issue, there's a problem. Take the time to just randomly surprise that salesperson with a phone call that there's not a problem. You're simply checking in on them. You're checking to see how the new grandbaby's doing. You're checking to see what they thought of the football game the day before. Whatever it is, get to know the people outside work and talk to them as a fellow human being and not just another cog in the wheel of your work, so to speak. It's amazing what that can do to build trust. The people I've worked with the longest, we've had an awful lot of fun together outside of work, and it goes a long way to making our work more fun. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand their point of view. At our office, we do a lot of collections with customers, and one thing we do is when we send the people in our office, if they're going to be there a while, we'll send them on ride-alongs with drivers doing pickups because we want them to know what the drivers go through. We want them to see what it's like. We recommend they go sit in a sales lot and shadow a salesperson while they're trying to make a sale. Just understand what those people are going through for the piece they play in your company. Make sure you understand their point of view. Their opinions may not always be great opinions. Their thoughts may not always be great thoughts, but when you understand each other's point of view, it really helps build that trust. Here's a big one. Listen with the intent to understand, not the intent to reply. This completely changes the posture of your conversation. So if I'm speaking to someone, if I'm speaking to Philip, and he's saying something, and while he's talking, I'm thinking, what am I going to say to respond to him? It completely changes how I hear him speak. But when he's saying something and I'm putting myself in the posture that I really want to know what Philip is saying, it's going to completely change how I hear what he has to say. And it's such a small concept, but if you practice this, and we actually practice in our office sometimes where we'll have our people just practice conversation and say, don't listen with the intent to respond, listen with the intent to understand. And what it does, it leads to a lot more follow-up questions. Instead of just responding to what the other person's saying, it's like, tell me more. So if somebody accuses me of something and I'm listening with the intent to respond, I'm going to right away start justifying myself. If somebody's accusing me of something, I'm listening with intent to understand, I'm going to say, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. And it just completely takes the edge off. This is powerful stuff. It might sound just like a cliche saying, but if you guys take this back and practice it, it can revolutionize. The trust and your understanding. The next one, make sure all affected parties have their voices heard. So I have a personal story to go with this one. All the things we've done incorrectly, which is how we learn, by the way. We go out and do things wrong, and then we can learn from our mistakes. But I was negotiating one time with a manufacturer. So at that time, I was managing a rent-owned company. And we had a couple of mutual pain points that I sat down with the manufacturer, and we were trying to work it out. One of the solutions that they presented was that they were going to take over a certain segment of the hauling, and they promised to do a certain amount of hauling at a certain price for us, and I agreed to it. The piece of information I was lacking in that was that the haulers were a third party. I thought they were company haulers. So all of a sudden, I made a deal with the manufacturer that involved hauling, but the haulers weren't in the conversation. That led to an awful lot of broken trust because all of a sudden the haulers were being asked to do stuff, and they're like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm like, well, you don't have a choice. Well, why don't we have a choice? Well, the rent-owned company said you have to do it this way. And we spent years trying to repair that broken trust and that reputation of that rent-owned company doesn't take care of its haulers. Actually, we really try really hard to. It was just a simple mistake. We made a decision that affected a party, and their voices weren't at the table. And so it would have saved months of heartache if we had just simply called up the driver and said, here's what we're thinking, will this work for you? And it's a 95% chance that they would have said, yep, works for us, and we would have been good to go. But because we didn't do that, they felt like we were trying to take advantage of them, and it caused a lot of broken trust that we spent a lot of years trying to remedy. So it's a big deal. And then that leads right into the next one, which is win-win or no deal. We try to create wins for the rent-owned company, the manufacturer, the salesperson, the driver, and the end-use customers. And when you realize that in order for one of those or several of those parties to win, somebody else is going to have to take an L, go for the no deal every time. And where you really build trust is when you go, actually, I'm not going to do that because that doesn't sound like it's a good deal for you. When you actually go that distance and say that, you can build a tremendous amount of trust, and you can actually repair a lot of broken trust. When you're trying to rebuild broken trust with someone, and you're saying, actually, I don't want to go along with that because you're getting the short end of the stick. I can do you one better. It's amazing how much trust you can build back in those by doing that. So go for the win-wins or the no deals. And that goes back to the whole thing of if there's a division of your goals, a division of your values, you're actually doing probably both parties a favor by having them switch to someone else who aligns more closely. And then that takes me to the number 5, the misunderstandings. So as my friend Jonathan Ulrich has coined, I've heard him say this probably a dozen times, and I like to quote him on it. He says, communicate so clearly that you cannot be misunderstood. And he always emphasized the word cannot. He's like, if you've been misunderstood, then you've not communicated clearly. And instead of putting the onus back on the other person, take it on yourself and say, I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. And then you communicate from a place of clarity. Try to avoid those misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are kind of like the ants that just create a nuisance everywhere they go. Be genuine. I guess Kyle's not in here, Kyle Summers. I'm going to tell a story on him. I wish he was here to hear it. So Kyle's the one that reached out to me and was like, hey, can you have this presentation? And I responded like, well, what qualifies me to have the presentation? So a little bit later, I get this long text with all the qualifications. My head started swelling up, and I probably couldn't have got it through my shirt today. But about the second paragraph, I'm like, I'm not reading Kyle Summers, I'm reading AI. And I called him out on it, like, which AI did you use to write that? And he told me, and I poked fun at him. I love Kyle, we're good friends. Kyle's genuine, but he just wasn't genuine in his response. And the AI response just did absolutely nothing for me. If anything, it made me like, I don't know if I want to do this speech. He could have said a small fraction of what he said, and if it was completely genuine, would have made a completely different difference on how it landed with me. You guys following what I'm saying there? So while AI is a very good tool, and I'm not dissing it, and I'm for sure not dissing Kyle, unless he was in the room, then I would definitely have at it. But be genuine. Let people know the real you. And sometimes that can be really scary. Sometimes that, we're like, well, if people actually saw the real me, they wouldn't like me. One thing we can do, I would encourage you, before you practice this on outside relationships, try it in your office, in your own teams. We try to, every time we have a really important meeting where we're trying to get to the bottom of an issue, or maybe we're trying to do some planning for the next year, something along those lines, we'll play a little trust-building game. And one of the questions we'll sometimes ask is, what is one thing that you wish you could change about yourself? And it gives people an opportunity to be extremely genuine, extremely vulnerable, and I have never seen that where it didn't just build a tremendous amount of trust in the end. So practice these things. Be quick to say, I'm sorry. Like I said, we all make mistakes. If you own your mistakes, it covers an awful lot of shortcomings. And then the phrase I promised to spend a little bit more time on, get below the surface. The issue is rarely the issue. What I mean by that is that avoiding the topic, help me out on the word I'm looking for, the topical disagreements. So almost always when there's a disagreement, a misunderstanding, the source of pain, the source of tension is not actually the source of tension. We have to go below the surface and find out, okay, so we're disagreeing about this thing up here, or I said this and they responded this way. Whatever happened, their response was much bigger. Something below the surface is causing that response. Something is causing that reaction. Personal story on this is I've been married 10 and a half years. I have a wonderful wife. She is my better half in every way. And we had probably the biggest, don't even want to say it's a disagreement, probably the biggest point of tension that we've had to do with the silly subject of mowing the yard. So here's what it was. I wanted my grass mowed a certain length, and she didn't care. And so I would come home from work, and it would just be this short, buzzed-off yard. And I would get so frustrated. I'm like, it's not that hard to adjust the mower up a couple settings and have a nice-looking yard. And she was like, well, I'm the one doing the work. Like, I didn't know. I just got on the mower and mowed it, and it was the way it was set the last time or whatever. It turned into big tension. But all of a sudden, we started realizing that whenever the subject of mowing yard came up, there was this tension, and we realized mowing the yard was not the topic. That was the topic, but it wasn't the issue. What was really happening was something way deeper. We had a mixture of grasses in our yard, warm season grasses, cool season grasses. Cool season grasses stay green through the summer and into the fall and winter. Warm season grasses are a lot greener in the spring, summer, but then they die off late summer. Cool season grasses need to be mowed longer. Warm season grasses need to be mowed shorter. Well, I was trying to switch our yard from a mix to cool season. So I had put lime and fertilizer down, I had sowed it and whatever. And so I had a vision for where we're going, but I hadn't made that vision very clear for my wife. And so whenever I'd come home and she had just scalped the yard, it felt like a direct disrespect to my vision. But I hadn't made the vision clear to her at all. I hadn't explained what it was, and so all of a sudden we're arguing about something as stupid as the mowing the yard, but underneath she felt like I didn't respect her because of her doing the work. She was taking the time to mow the yard. I should just be thrilled that she had mowed the yard and thank her. Instead, I'm feeling disrespected and unheard, and my opinion didn't matter. And so we took a step back and was like, okay, the real issue is not the real issue. And that's pretty evident in marriage, but I would dare to say that happens a whole lot more in business than we realize. And so when there is a topic of frustration or there's a topic of disagreement, take a step back and say, before I respond to that email, before I respond to that phone call, I'm going to just think a little bit, what could be triggering this that's deeper than the actual frustration, the actual complaint? And oftentimes you'll find that the issue is not the issue. And if you can have a little bit of empathy, a little bit of respect, it's amazing how you can just cover tons of that stuff. And you can get to that trust that is absolutely phenomenal and fun to work with. And when you have trust, all of a sudden when there is a misunderstanding, it's a lot easier just to overlook it. It's like, well, I know who the person is. They didn't mean that. Whereas if you don't know the person and you don't have that trust, all of a sudden those little things really matter. Another quote that I like by my friend Steve is, people do what people do because of what they feel. If you do not understand what they are doing, it is because you do not understand what they are feeling. This carries a lot of weight in business too. Let's just take a step back and go, why would that person respond that way? It's almost never why you think it is at the first glance. So, kind of recapping what we've talked about. Trust is built. You could also put in there repaired, because sometimes we're more in repair mode than we are in building mode. Keeping your commitments, being consistent, being competent and humble, having empathy and respect, and having clear understandings. And that is all, folks. So thanks a lot for participating. I hope you got something out of here that you can take home and put to use. I thoroughly enjoy being able to give value where I can give value, so I appreciate your attention.